Jael Ealey Richardson didn't just write a memoir. She retraced her father's footsteps from the dreams of a high school football star in the segregated U.S. school system to glory on the gridiron in Hamilton, and beyond as his story intermingles and helps explain her own. It's a story of lives marked by determination, love, but also the corrosive power of racism. Jael has adapted her memoir into a children's book called The Stone Thrower. She and her father, Chuck Ealey, join us now. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
It's a thrill to have you both here. So Jael, you wrote the memoir a few years ago.
Yeah.
Now you've adapted it into a children's book. Why?
Well, I would love to say that it was a great idea I had all on my own, but it was actually a friend of mine who is a teacher librarian in Peel, and she said, you know, we really need more stories like this that can be taught to kids that feature Black characters and Canadian Black history. And so that was one of the main reasons that I wrote it, was because there was sort of a gap in the children's book industry for stories that tell African Canadian stories.
And because of the memoir, it deals with your father's life and living in the U.S. when it was segregated. Trying to put that in a children's book, was that difficult?
Yeah, it was difficult, actually. There was a couple of words, like even segregation, and there was words like that you have to think about, how do you explain that to young kids? I go into schools all the time and I put segregation up there, and sometimes in the older levels they'll know what it means, but certainly grade 1, grade 2, they can hardly read the word, let alone understand its meaning. So it was important to try and craft the story in a way that would appeal to ages about 6 through 8, and to use words and frame the conversation in a way that they could understand.
And Chuck, what was it like to hear your story told through your daughter's voice?
Well, it was kind of amazing, obviously, with when you look at the reasonings and the things that she had to go through and what she was thinking. It was a very interesting way to go through the process, because I'm very quiet in most cases and laid back about it, but she brought it all out.
Was there anything surprising that you read in the book that, you know, you didn't know, the way she saw it?
Well, no, I don't think there was anything surprising, because a lot of it came from me. What was more surprising from her standpoint, I think, is that I never really talked about a lot of this stuff that she was able to talk about when she did her memoir. But when she finished it all up, we had some conversation and went back to my hometown and back to my university, and she got a different insight into what took place in my life.
And why did you want to write a memoir about your dad?
That one was a really important one for me. I really felt like I wanted to know more about his story, and I also wanted to know more about my past. And I think there was also this feeling that my dad's an only child, my grandmother is no longer with us, and if something happened to my dad, if he passed away, all those stories would be gone, and I wouldn't know what happened, and I wouldn't be able to share that with my own kids. And having my son actually really sparked the momentum and the need to make sure I got the story and I worked it out and I figured it out to share with others.
Did you have any pushback from any of your family members? Because when you write a memoir, you are telling stories that maybe some people, well, obviously people outside of your family are going to know.
Yeah. Well, I was actually doing my thesis. It was a part of my master's. I was doing my thesis, and my whole family had read my thesis and decided to come to my defense. And my teacher said, you know, this is a really good book, but I think you need to take it down another level. I think you need to go a little bit deeper. And it's great to talk about how awesome your dad is, but you sort of need to start before that. And so it was good to have all of them hear that, so that they knew that it wasn't just me trying to tell a darker story. I wanted them to know, I wanted to tell a great story about my dad, but I realized in order to tell the great story, I had to talk about, you know, our less than perfect beginnings and my less than perfect perspective as an adolescent.
Well, in the memoir, you've woven your story with your dad's story, your present experiences with his past experiences. But in the children's book, there's nothing about you.
Yeah.
How come?
I think it's space. I mean, in a children's book, there's like limited space. It's the children's book doesn't even cover my dad's whole life. It's really just up until the end of high school. It sort of caps off the last page a little bit more. So it was really mostly about space. It was mostly that. I think with the memoir, the reason I didn't have any intentions exactly of including my own story when I set out, but every time I tried to tell the story of my dad, I couldn't quite get it out without explaining why it was so important and difficult. You know, I really had to start with the fact that my dad didn't want to talk about these things, because I think that's what makes the story so interesting. There's a lot of people who work with my dad who read the story and were like, I've worked with him for years and didn't know these things, you know?
So why did you want people to know these stories?
Well, I've always been very private from the time I was in high school and grade school and high school and right through university. For the most part, the things that sort of guided my life belonged to me for the most part. And even the successes, as people would call them successes, I never told the kids about what my career was about and the like, but they found it on their own as we went back to Toledo, different things that happened. And it was just more of a privacy issue for me. I'm a very private person for the most part. Even if the good stuff is out there, not just the bad stuff, but the good stuff as well. And I neither boast or brag, or do I sort of feel pity or bad things for myself in regards to it. It's just the way I grew up and how I handled things.
But you've accomplished so much. Like, against the greatest adversity ever, you've accomplished so much. And I think, you know, I mean, in this age of social media, people eat a sandwich and they post it, hey, look what I did today. But you've made, like, you broke ground.
Yeah.
And where does that, I guess, where does that strength come from?
Well, I think, you know, I lived through it. So when you're living through it in stages and pieces and parts, and all of a sudden you're there, that's happened, and you look back and you now wish that you could probably go, oh, he's a leader at that time. You don't say I'm a leader when I'm playing football, you go play. And so I think you sort of gradually grow into it, more so than sort of thinking that I did all these things. All those things were very natural things for me to accomplish and achieve, because I was focused on a sport or education or whatever I wanted to accomplish. And because all the other things went with it, you don't sort of go back and sort of say, yeah, that was great. It was just living my life. And the biggest thing I wanted to do was get my education, have my family, and making sure that they were okay. And so the rest of it was just bonus stuff that happened as the world sees it nowadays.
I think we have to like sing your praises, because Jael, give us an idea of where your father grew up and what he accomplished.
Yeah, I think that is the thing about my dad that's been so powerful to learn. I mean, he grew up in a low-income, segregated neighborhood.
In Portsmouth, Ohio.
In Portsmouth, Ohio. His mom had an 8th grade education, and his father walked out on divorce. The marriage broke up when my dad was 5. And I think the thing that's so compelling to me is not only did he walk out, but his dad was a rumbler. I don't know what word you would use. You know, I learned when I was researching, he had been shot, he had been stabbed, he was a drunk, you know, and it wasn't like this was this huge city that he wouldn't have seen him. He would have seen him walking around, he would have heard about it. So those kinds of things, when we hear people coming from those circumstances, we always have this assumption that it's hopeless, that it's never gonna get any better. And my dad was really, for me, a testament that it can get better. I mean, if you really have your focus on the right things, it can change the trajectory of your life. And you know, his brother had cancer. Like, there's just so many things that happened. And that's one of the things when I was writing the story that was so compelling to me. I went looking for the story of a man who had won a whole bunch of games. And I found a story of a man who had overcome some of the most difficult human circumstances. You know, you losing a young brother, having a father who's drunk, having a stepfather who's abusive. Like, these are all things that are so challenging on so many levels. And to have him come out and not only win games, but raise a family who is, you know, for the most part, functional.
That's for another memoir.
I know. You know, a loving, really content family unit. To be the father of that unit is a really powerful thing. And I couldn't stop seeking how.
And you were called the stone thrower.
Yeah.
How come?
Oh, well, it's a very interesting story in the sense that it really wasn't meant to be a story. When I was a kid, the challenging factor for me was to be the best that I could possibly be, because I wanted to get an education, and the only way that was going to happen is through sport and football. So I was good in basketball, baseball, and football. So when other people didn't practice, I used to go up on the railroad track that ran through our part of town, and it was held up by these boulders, and it was a train that came through. It was Norfolk and Western, N&W, and I learned to be a quarterback and throwing the ball and passing and using the the movement of the train and the letters on the train as a avenue to anticipate where a receiver would be by me throwing a rock at that spot.
How old were you when you started?
12, 13, 14, just in my high school, going into my high school career, trying to be the best quarterback because I had all the mobility, but I wanted to learn how to, make sure I did that other part well as well. But so it caused me to go up there. So it was just something a kid would do, but you never think of it as a story. And so that's what the Stone Thrower is about.
It's a great story for the book,
yeah.
for your memoir.
Right.
Now, you both grew up in different countries and in different eras. What did Blackness mean to both of you while you were growing up?
I probably should answer that first. I was in our community. Blackness was, how can you say it, not a good thing? It was a great thing. Because
even in a segregated time?
Yeah, and what I mean by saying that, there was no other choice but to make it a great thing. Right. What made it a difficult thing was the culture around you that told you that blackness was not right, and how they would subject you to things like can't go to the white pool. You can't go to certain places to be and feel safe because you were black. So, but what happened is when you have that kind of community involvement, you come together, and that taught love and character and support and all those type of things that will build you stronger than versus letting it bring you down. So you have a choice. So I think that's what made a difference for me growing through that culture and staying focused on the things that I could control and move through it.
And Jael, for you?
Yeah, blackness was a really confusing thing for me growing up. I think when I started to realize that I was black and I started to wrestle with what that meant, it mainly had to do with the fact that I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere, like I was a person without a home, because to be Canadian to me meant to be white. And you saw it on TV, you saw it reinforced, and I remember the I Am Canadian commercial where Joe stands up and lists all the things that make you Canadian, and some of the things I didn't even understand, but I saw this young white man and I said, that's Canadian, he's wearing plaid, he's Canadian. And I couldn't figure out what that meant to me. And I would see my black friends and people in the black community who are West Indian, and they sort of had this sense that their home was somewhere else, like Jamaica was their home or Trinidad. And I didn't have that other place where I really felt grounded either. And so I just ended up feeling really homeless in a sense. Did
you ever talk to your dad about that?
No, I mean, that was one of the things I think that happened with the book. I remember him reading about that and thinking, I remember realizing that all of his friends from high school were white and being like, oh, we speak the same language, we've been through the same thing. And I remember him realizing that as well. But I don't think we never talked about it ever. And I think that for me, being black has come to mean that I am Canadian.
Do you feel connected at all to American identity?
See, that's a tricky thing. I don't really. No, I don't. I mean, I think there's a sense that my story comes from there. I feel a sense of history there, but I so don't seem to fit the politics that go on there. I don't like the way the culture in a lot of ways is hard for me. So I don't feel like I belong there either. I feel very deeply appreciated for African American history makers and people who are continuing to champion causes there, because I think it's really important and I feel connected on that level. But I wouldn't say that I would go there and feel home. I wouldn't. Yeah.
Is Canada more home for you now than the States?
Oh, definitely. I think that the most of my life I've lived in Canada more so than living in the States. I think that I came to Canada to live the American dream, as I call it, to play quarterback. And I think what the Canadian environment gave me was not only a social world, but a freedom world that I can be anything and do anything I want that I made myself capable to do. And I think that was a very encouraging. But I want to correct something. Jill said, most of my friends were white. Well, I went to a white school, but most of my friends were black.
How did you come to go to a white school?
Because there was two schools in the area. There was a public school, small town, and it was very mixed between black and white. And then there was the Catholic school. I chose to go to the Catholic school because of the sports and because of the things that I thought I would have a better opportunity at there. So out of about 400 kids, 4 or 5 of them were black students in the whole school. But we were treated very well there. And I think, as I said earlier today, that sport becomes a very good equalizer
It's a universal language.
Yeah.
But when you did play at different schools, didn't you experience racism?
Oh, you at different times. I mean, most of the times you would be okay because you're far away. But when I played basketball in an arena that was in a totally white town or something, you can hear the words and phrases and the comments that were coming out of the stands, and you kept your cool and you kept playing through that process. But you expect it. We lived in a community where we knew. At that period of time, the mid-'60s, Martin Luther King period of time, Kennedy assassination, we knew in the middle of all this thing, that was our country. It wasn't just our city. It was just the way the world was at that time and the things that were going on. And so you knew how to protect yourself. You knew how to work together, walk together, be together in a community environment. And you learn to live like that. You don't like it, but you learn how to live like that.
And Jael, like growing up in Canada, obviously, I want to follow up with you, but there is racism, you see it. But when you think of the fact that your father didn't get the opportunity to play in the NFL like he should have, but Canada at the time, 40 years ago, he came here and he played quarterback. Does that change? How does that make you feel about Canada? Or is racism the same? Or
I think there's racism. I love Canada. I felt deeply connected to Canada on some level. I think mostly I felt like Canada didn't want me. That's how I felt racism here. I felt like I've always proudly said I'm Canadian. I've never tried to be in two places. I've always felt like I was born here and I am Canadian, but I haven't felt always welcome. I haven't felt welcome in certain settings and in certain contexts. And I felt like I've had to sort of claw my way in because I'm Black and, in the writing industry and publishing, I've had to really dig my fingers in and make space for myself in a lot of ways. And that's where I think the sort of systemic racism is one of the biggest challenges we have in Canada. We don't see it where you see it in the States. I mean, in the States, you drive into neighborhoods and it's the Black neighborhood. You're very clear about what's going on. In Canada, you drive into very mixed neighborhoods. Even our low-income housing is intertwined, but there's still a racism that lies underneath the surface. At a systemic level, leadership positions are largely held by white and usually white men. And so there's things that are difficult when you are a minority that Canada sometimes doesn't want to acknowledge, and that can make it a little bit hard to work with too.
And Chuck, having the experiences you had in segregated America, what are your views on Canada?
Obviously a little different in the context of because when you come from the deepest part of racism to something where you're socially accepted and allowed to play and be and do what you want to do on that level, some of the systemic things that Jael was talking about did not necessarily play in my life, in my control. And I think when you come to a place where you have the freedom to go and freedom to do things in principle is a big start from when you can't go and you don't see anything where you can't go to a white pool or something like that that's really out there as far as where you could see. So it was a big change for me because they offered me an opportunity to play a position as quarterback coming to Canada where there was no barriers at all. Not even a question about it, and not even the fact, he's a Black quarterback. No, he's a quarterback. That's the way I felt, so mine's a little bit different.
Do you ever think about that? Because you wrote a letter to the NFL saying that the only position you wanted to play was quarterback.
Yeah.
And some people say that that's the reason why you weren't drafted. Do you ever think I shouldn't have, or do you ever think about that?
Absolutely not. Really, you know what? And I think that this is the big thing that I try to tell young kids. I said, my issue was not playing football to play professional football. My issue was to get a scholarship. I could have got one in basketball or baseball or something else. Whatever was going to happen to me to allow me to go to school was fine. And I never had a dream about playing professional football at any position. But when I got to my senior year and they came around to me understanding what had happened in my career, I said, okay, I'll take a look at this. And I said, the only position I want to play is quarterback because I don't have to. I have my degree. And I could go and do what I felt I could do and wanted to do at that time. And so when the draft came, I said, my agent at the time, he says, okay, what do you want to do? I said, well, we can draft a letter and just say, look, we understand where the NFL is, but I don't want to play any other position except for quarterback. Otherwise, I'm.
Were you
not going."
worried if you didn't get into the NFL what you would do?
No. I mean, because see, when you eliminate the issue, and the issue was playing professional football, I eliminated that issue on their circumstances. And I wasn't trying to be brash, and some of the things that I think Jael thought I was being, or people thought I was being attitudinal. I just said no. I mean, I'm okay. I'll be okay. I'll figure this out. And so, but then the CFL came and sort of wiped out that avenue. I knew that they weren't going to do it anyway, because they did things that have you may not, some people may not understand this, run the 40. No quarterbacks run a 40-yard dash for time. That's something defensive backs, wide receivers, running backs, all those people do. Quarterbacks don't do that. So when they asked me to do that, I knew where they were coming from. And I said, okay, no, let's let them know that I'll do your running, but I'm not going there in that other position. So that was what it was all about.
And Jael writes in the memoir that in one generation, you were able to switch you grew up poor, segregated America, then your children grew up in middle class Canada.
Well, I think that was a very motivating factor to me. Knowing what had happened and transpired, the whole, I guess, segment of it was my mother, who inspired me about education, even though she didn't have one. And I think there was an ownership that I took on in that process to make sure that my family was whole. And mom, dad, kids, and everybody had a chance to move forward. And I think those driving factors were far greater than just playing professional football and those type of things as well.
And Jael, you started a festival of literal diversity called The Fold.
Yes.
What is that?
So the Festival of Literary Diversity is Canada's first festival for diverse books. So there's festivals all across Canada that promote books, and many of them have some diversity. Oftentimes they don't. And we're the first festival to make diversity sort of the priority, the starting point, as opposed to an afterthought. And so when we go looking for programming, we're looking for authors who tell different kinds of stories, who have different kinds of lived experiences, and really highlighting those.
What do you think of what she's done?
I think it was amazing. I was there for a couple of days of the events that were there, and it was she did an outstanding job in regards to the people, the community, and what was had. And I was impressed, I should say, by the number of authors and by the spoken word, written word that was there. And it was such a cohesive collection of people that it was outstanding.
And Jael, you started this journey because you wanted to find out more about your father.
Yeah.
Now, in hindsight, what have you learned about your father that you didn't know?
Well, I didn't know just how focused he had been. I didn't realize the kind of intensity that it takes to go from his circumstances to where we are now. I just didn't understand the story behind his most famous career, right? He has these undefeated streak, but he started a foundation that's really about the undefeated spirit. And that's the thing that's really stood out to me in him, is this undefeated spirit. The idea that no matter what comes your way, you face it and you take it on and you practice, and the idea of excellence. I'm a perfectionist, and I think one of the things that went well over the festival, I can see that drive in me as well, that desire to be excellent. And if that's one thing I'd like to impress on my own kids, that's it, right? Doing things over and over and over again until you're excellent, and then inspiring other people to do the same.
And how would you say, Chuck, your relationship has evolved with your daughter after the memoir?
You know what? She's still my daughter, but she's an adult now. And I think there's a different relationship happens as you get older and you work things through and you see the experiences go. I think it's a good insight for all three of my kids that I can see the direction of my mother through me, through them, and pass it on there. So I think there is a closeness and a bond in our family based off of the things that have happened, both with my wife and the things, with what we were doing with our kids over the period of time that's outstanding. And I think Jael's taken it to another special level. Sky, the other daughter, she's taken it to a special level. And my son's working in Japan. So I think that all of that cohesiveness of the family becomes all the things I wanted to do when I knew I didn't have a dad at home and had only my mother.
What would your mother say if she was here?
She would just get up and hug us all. And that's the kind of passion that she had with what she did. She was not educated, as we know, as educated terms, but she was educated in life, in love and feeling and emotion. So I know that's what she's been doing. Hug us all right here.
And Jael, how has your relationship evolved with your dad since the memoir came out?
I think there's a greater respect. I think when you grow up as a teenager in a middle class, upper class family, you can sort of take things for granted. And there were times when I thought my dad should have been around more. He should have done this and not that. And when I looked at what he had been through and the experience of not having a father at all, I can't even. I mean, it's a miracle. It's a God thing, as we say in our home, that he could be such a deeply powerful father and a powerful role model in our family without that typical family like father role growing up. I'm just amazed that can happen, and because of that I look at him very differently as a father and as the grandfather to my son and to my nephews. Anything he has to offer us is like above and beyond what we deserve. And it's a really powerful message to me, and to share it with other kids at schools is really important, because I want them to see that no matter where they are, they can become parents that raise children that change the world and shape the world through words, through writing, through art, through sport, whatever it is, that they have the power to transform another generation, even if they're starting out in rough times.
Anything is possible.
Anything.
Thank you for writing the memoir, because without it, a lot of people wouldn't know about all the great things that your dad has done.
Thank you.
And I want to just sort of make sure, I want to thank her, but thank her mother, who made me to take care of those things. So thanks, dear.
Happy wife, happy life, right? Thank you both.
Okay.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.